Hello, and welcome to Metachemistry. This is episode 110. We're looking to have kind of a discussion about mechanics. We're doing a skill analysis, which is where we take a look at a special skill or piece of equipment or other mechanic in Infinity and break it down, talk about ways that you might use it, ways that you might expect to be used against you, and how you can get around that if need be. And today we're talking about a brand new mechanic to N5, and that is the Speedball. You're probably already aware, but just in case you're not, the Speedball is basically a power-up drop that you can bring onto the field mid-game and start to wreak havoc with those extra abilities. But before we get started and kind of go in depth on Speedball, we want to say thanks to Mo Games, the sponsor of Metachemistry. Mythic's Online Emporium is an online supplier for Infinity, which you can find at mo-games.com. And as part of that sponsorship, any paid patrons of Metachemistry of any level get a 10% discount code to that store. And you can be a free member of our show, you just won't get that discount. And in addition, we raffle off a $40 coupon code each month to one of our users in North America, since that's where Mo Games is able to ship to. And in order to enter that, you just need to be a part of our Discord server, which you can find in our show notes. Just be a part of that, join the conversation. Because what's better than games? Mo Games. And so for tonight, it's going to be Ian and myself. I want to give another quick shout out to a couple events before we dive in. First off, we have our big local event, the Krug. The Corvus Belli Krug is going to be happening here in late August on the 23rd and 24th, and this will be kind of a reimagining of the Krug. This has support of Corvus Belli and is kind of going to be the North American Interplanetario, essentially. So definitely make sure to come out for that. The registration, last I saw, was around 80 members or so. So they're getting close to full. There is some flex room for people wanting to join, but there has to be a certain threshold for that to happen. So if you're looking to go, make sure to go register.
Yep. And the important part is that the Interplanetario is the end of the season. The Krug is the start of the season.
Yeah, so the Krug this year will be Season 17, and that'll be the launching event for ITS 17. So yeah, very cool stuff.
Yeah.
And otherwise, our friends on the East Coast are having, out in December, on the 6th and 7th, is the Beantown Beatdown, which is at the Everwinter Gaming Convention. So you can find that as well. You can mark yourself as interested on their Facebook event, and you can already sign up for it on ITS. You can go check that out towards the end of this year. So, with all of that news out of the way, and all of our guests having been on, kind of taking up what we might normally spend for catch-up time, how have you been, Ian? It's been a while.
Yeah. Well, it's been fun moving. So, new house.
Mm-hmm.
All kinds of stuff going on with that.
Super exciting.
Yeah, there's been some mix-ups with some appliance delivery stuff where the delivery company doesn't want to own their mistakes, and if they don't fix it soon, I'm gonna go howler monkey and eat their faces. So it's just I'm just try me. So outside of that, it's been fun. Been trying to get some gaming in where I can. We've been doing the Training Incident Escalation League locally, just kind of getting new players. So that's been fun. Gotten a couple of matches in on that so far, and had a good time on both of those. I was gonna figure out when I can get my next match in on that.
Yeah.
Outside of Infinity, there's a new Star Trek game called Into the Unknown, and it's a blast. It's the most Star Trek miniatures game ever.
Is it a fleet combat?
But that's the thing, is it combat?
Oh, I don't know.
So it's a miniatures game. There is combat, but that's not the entirety of the game. There's exploration and diplomacy and all the things that make Star Trek that aren't just combat
Okay.
are in this. And so it's like, a mission is like the two sides kind of, you have like up to 3 systems on a map and deep space in between. You have to warp between systems, and then you're kind of investigating different things and objectives on the map, and you can like hail the enemy ships and like come to agreements on things, and then eventually something will happen and it'll trigger kind of the conflict phase of the game, and depending on which side has more influence at the time will determine how that conflict plays out and how the new objectives are set. And it's really cool, and it's designed for campaign play and persistent fleets and stuff like that. And so far it's been an absolute blast. So yeah, been getting some games into that. Recommend checking it out if you like Star Trek. There was a fleet action or whatever, and it was basically X-Wing with Star Trek ships.
Gotcha. Yeah, I don't play a lot of space combat games, so I'm not super familiar.
Yeah, this is not that. This is actually like it's a cool game, and the ships are to scale with each other. So like the Enterprise D, the Galaxy class, is like a 6-inch long model, and the Defiant is like 1.5 inches because it's a little escort.
Okay, that's fun.
I've been having a lot of fun with it. It's just been kind of a different type of game to play. So
for sure. Yeah, I was gonna say it sounds like kind of a longer running board game style game.
Yeah, a little bit. Like it's a miniatures game, but it's very much kind of a board game in its setup and stuff. But you still measure stuff out and move things. So it's a lot of fun. I've been enjoying it.
Nice. Yeah, for me, I've been mostly busy running said Training Incident League, which has been great. I've been absolutely blown away by the turnout. We have 30 signups, and we are partway through round 3 of 5, and we've only had 2 drops. So it's been really, really good. I've been super excited for that. So I'm getting together prizes and some pins and stuff and trying to kind of make that a little bit more exciting. It was kind of fun just to do some designer exercises with that. I made some simple missions. So all of the 5 missions for the event are custom. They're based off of other missions, but yeah, all custom stuff and designed to be kind of direct action style missions, so you don't need extra stuff. So it's easier for new players to join in without necessarily needing to find a way to get HVT models and getting an operations deck and dealing with a bunch of things to place on the table and stuff like that. In between, I've been playing kind of my usual lineup of OSS and Tunguska, and I've been playing a couple games of Torchlight to kind of get a better feel for them. So that's been fun. I've done a handful of learning games. Like I'm usually getting in one learning game for a new player almost every week. And then oftentimes I can get in just a regular game as well. So yeah, there's been a lot of Infinity action locally, which is super, super fun. Really excited about that. About another month to go, roughly, because we're spreading each round over 2 weeks just so people have time to get those games in.
Yeah.
But as far as our actual topic for today, we have the Speedball. And Speedball is kind of a contentious rule of sorts, is pretty high impact. So first off, the important thing to know is that it costs a command token to buy your 2 Speedballs. You do this after deployment, and you decide and purchase in initiative order. So whoever's going first needs to pick if they're going to get the Speedballs, and then the person going second gets to know that before they decide, which can sometimes influence that decision, I think, but it's kind of independent. It's not like they cancel each other out or anything like that. Ian, do you kind of want to break down the basics as far as how you actually get and use Speedballs? And then a little bit later, we'll talk about the actual options.
So Speedballs are a little interesting because you purchase them before the game starts. You gain 2 Speedball tokens. These are 55mm tokens. Have fun finding that in the book. You have to reference the token sheet to find out what size they are. But they are 55mm. Once you have them, during your active turn, you can bring them in. This does not cost an order. It happens in between orders. It's a little weird, but that's where it is. You just choose to bring them in. And so what you do is you pick from a list of 6 different upgrades which one the first speedball is going to be, and then you roll a d20 and reference the list to see what random item is the second speedball is going to be. Once you have that figured out, you place the tokens on the field wherever you want them.
Not touching stuff, basically.
Not touching anything. And then you roll a combat jump against a target of 14 to see if they land there. If they fail, they go on your board edge like any other combat jump. But importantly, this is a token, it is not a trooper, so things like controlled jump do not affect this positively or negatively. So then once they land, wherever that ends up being, you take a trooper and it touches it and it automatically picks up the upgrade and carries it around until a situation pops up that triggers that upgrade, which could be you taking a wound or a hacking program going off against you. There's different triggering conditions for each one. Once that happens, the item is used and it's gone. They're all single-use items. A model that is carrying one of these, certain ones can be used on other models where you move into base contact and you spend short skill out of your order to then utilize that on somebody else. But otherwise, they're not really transferable. So mostly want to use them on the guy that is carrying them.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the things that is kind of interesting about the Speedball rules is that when this was discussed in kind of the lead up and previews to N5, this was positioned as like a catch-up mechanic, like something that you would use if you were kind of on the back foot that could kind of help push you back into the game and give you a little bit of oomph to keep going where you might be running out of options otherwise. With that in mind, how well do you feel like these mechanics fit that vision, in your opinion, Ian?
Not super well.
It's kind of what I'm thinking.
To be honest. So the thing is like, I see that intent and like starting the edition with that in mind, I had been initially trying to utilize them reactively as a catch-up mechanic. Because it's like kind of this how it's presented, this is how I approached it. I'm like, okay, this guy got hacked. I'm going to drop down this thing to get rid of the state. Or I'm going to drop this down to go try to heal this guy up. Because that was how it was presented. But it's become apparent that it's far more effective to proactively use them to just say, I'm going to drop this in front of my my heavy gunfighter and effectively give him an extra wound to this, until he gets shot. But he basically just gets a free wound.
Yep.
Or a free point of structure on a tag or whatever it is. So it seems like it's much more offensive than it is defensive or catch-up mechanic for a lot of these.
Yeah, it feels like this is a very powerful first turn tool to kind of overcome enemy defenses and kind of insulate yourself from variance. And like you said, just make it so I can take an extra wound that I wouldn't be able to recover from otherwise, or I can walk through your set of repeaters knowing that you can't do anything to me, or things like that.
Yeah.
And that doesn't really feel like it meshes very well with the vision of the mechanic that was presented, at least. Before we dive too much further into that, I do want to go over the 6 items you can potentially get from a Speedball. First option is the Vita Pack. The Vita Pack essentially allows a trooper that has the Vitality attribute to automatically recover a wound at the end of an order in which it suffered a wound. This includes even if it goes down to unconscious, it will get back up with 1 wound. However, if you do go to dead before this kicks in, it doesn't matter. So if you take too many wounds in the same order, then you won't get any benefit. But this is one of the Speedball items that you can use on an ally. So if you pick this up with a trooper, you move into silhouette contact with an allied trooper, you can spend a short skill to just automatically, without a roll, remove a wound from a trooper with vitality.
Yep. And then as a companion to that, next one is Auto Repair Suite, which does the exact same thing, but for models with structure.
Mm-hmm.
And is also one that you can use on an allied trooper to remove a wound off their structure attribute.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where, like, if you have a tag or even just a remote, that's not coming off the table in one order almost ever. Like, it can, but it's just going to be almost impossible.
I'll also tell you, it has been kind of fun with running around like 3-wound Hatamoto.
Yeah, I bet.
like, yes, have fun dealing with that.
Right. And then you have Switch On. And Switch On says that if you enter Immobilized A, Immobilized B, Isolated, or Stunned, then the end of the order, all of those states are removed automatically, and that consumes the item. And this is the final option you can use to slap on an ally. So if someone's carrying it, you can spend a short skill to apply it and remove all of those said states from another ally that's in silhouette contact. So this just lets you kind of move with impunity through repeater nets and the like, or bypassing EM arrows or what have you.
Mm-hmm. Next up is the jetpack. The bearer can use the super jump jet propulsion skill on one order only. You have a one-use jetpack jet propulsion move, but it is restricted to Silhouette 2 troopers. So no jetpacking tags or jetpacking bikes or anything like that. Just Silhouette 2 troopers.
Yep. Then you have Overkill. And Overkill is kind of interesting because it's the only one that has two different effects. And so you can use this to either cancel the unloaded state, and so you get all your disposable equipment back at the end of an order, or you can spend it to give yourself the BS attack SR -1. So you can basically have one order of shooting where your weapons hit just a little bit harder.
Loading the big bullets this time.
Yeah.
And then the final one is the Nano Shield. So this one's interesting. It is a mod to your saving roll. So any trooper that has it, they have to take any saving rolls, and it doesn't matter what they're from. It just applies to everything. You get a +2 mod to your saving rolls for that order.
Yeah. And this is what's interesting about this is because it is a saving roll modifier, this isn't affected by, say, templates that ignore the benefit of cover, or it's not lessened by AP or K1 or monofilament, things like that, because it's an addition to your threshold to be able to pass the roll. So nothing gets around that. I mean, I guess SR -X.
And it works against comms attacks.
Yeah, anything you would make a save for.
Yeah. That's pretty powerful. I think of all of them, it's kind of the second most meh. Because I think the jetpack one is probably the least useful in my opinion. But like that one, like it's going to come up. But I'd rather have the extra wound most of the time.
Yeah, especially since Nano Shield is slightly weighted to show up higher.
Yeah.
So 4 of the items have 3 faces on a d20 where they'll show up, and then Switch On and Nano Shield have 4, so you actually get to a 20-sided die. So those are just a little more likely to come up compared to the others. So I feel like the kind of big offenders are the first 3 on this list. Vitapack / auto repairs, which are just kind of 2 sides of the same coin, and then the Switch On. So the thing with these is that they let you just brute force through things and kind of give you that insulation against variance that I mentioned earlier. If you fail a save, that maybe it wasn't very likely because it's a tag and you have, armor 7, 8 plus, and you just happen to get a bad roll, or you need to move to get past a repeater, but it doesn't matter if your opponent lands the hits or not because you can just switch on to get out of it automatically. Those sorts of things seem very, very powerful as a top of one mechanic to just ensure that you have that much extra edge in getting past enemy arrows and getting to your objective or diving towards their DZ or whatever you're trying to accomplish top of one. And these are the kind of things that make me not love the mechanic quite so much. Like the idea is cool, but it doesn't fit what the intended design appears to be.
Yeah. Feels like there should be maybe a restriction on it of like, this is tough, but like can only be used in like the third turn, or can only be used after you've suffered, X percentage losses, that kind of thing, which also can suck, because even if you spend the command token on it and those thresholds aren't met, then you kind of wasted a command token.
Yeah.
But it just, it feels like it leans a little too heavily towards making your offensive abilities better rather than propping you up and letting you, swing back into things when you're down.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that even just restricting it to second turn or second round, or even just not usable top of one, but it's probably more clean to write it as players can do this starting from the second round onward. And another thing that may help that, especially kind of the feel bad you were mentioning, where you could potentially pay for this and then not be able to use it or not find an opportunity where it's helpful, is to change it to an executive or procedural use, where you either decide at the beginning of a given turn or even just mid-turn to buy it and drop it when you need it.
Limit once per game or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the other 3 items are interesting, but those first 3 are kind of the killers. Like those are the things that you're almost always going to select and then hope that you roll one of those as well. It's kind of what that boils down to.
Yeah. Yeah, the overkill one, I've only used it to modify the save rolls. And every time I've used it to modify the save rolls, it didn't matter in the least. Yeah, they either passed or failed by not whatever that modifier was. So it was like, okay.
Yeah, it seems pretty cool in some circumstances. Like Overkill and Nano Shield, I think, are the most interesting and the most kind of like fun. But they're definitely not the reliable choices, the ones that will let you just keep going and get the job done. So yeah, it's an interesting predicament. I really wish that this had been the ITS season rule instead of the tactical support, I believe it's called.
Yeah.
Where you draw cards from the operations deck.
I like that because it's becoming a new way to use those cards and has some kind of cool stuff in it. But between the two, I don't know. I could take or leave either on that one.
Yeah, it's just one of those things where I feel like it would be better to use an ITS season as a testing ground for Speedball. If the mechanic is well received and it's going well and things like that, then you can potentially see changes season over season in terms of, oh, well, maybe we do something more thematic, and like you could have something that interacts with certain missions perhaps, or just interesting things that might be tied to a specific season. Like something comes to mind is like, oh, well, maybe, I guess this is probably overly specific, but I was thinking like, oh, here's like a heating unit that allows a trooper to survive in the frostbite zone without meeting the unit requirement or type requirement or things like that. Again, that's probably too specific, but just off the top of my head, things like that where it kind of ties into the missions in some meaningful way. Or maybe like you give a trooper the baggage skill for ground control missions or something like that. That might be problematic in some ways given the prevalence of turrets and other things like that. But again, just very quick spitballing as far as that goes. I think you could change that season over season.
Then they need to add the table for this into Army.
That would be nice, yeah.
Yeah, since just had everything other tables in there, and this one, it's like, just please add it in so that I don't have to keep going into the rule document to figure out what I'm rolling for. I can just have it in one spot in the app to be Fantastic.
So, Mike, if you're listening, requested feature, please. If you're seeing this, someone has won the initiative. They're going first. They decide they're picking the logistical use to buy Speedball tokens, and you start setting up. Do you think that your opponent buying Speedballs has any bearing on whether or not you're going to get some if you are going second?
I don't really think so. Because from what I'm seeing and what I'm kind of looking at is I don't see why you don't buy Speedballs, regardless of whether you're going first or second. To be honest, I think you do. And especially if there's an argument of like, maybe I need those command tokens to do other things. And that's absolutely valid. But then when you hit the point, especially if you're running a lieutenant that gives you an extra command token, like, why not? At that point, it's effectively free.
Sure.
Like, you didn't really expend any extra resources to get them. You still have 4 command tokens.
Yep.
So, like, why not? But yeah, I think that they are, at this point in the life cycle of the edition, I think they're auto-include.
Sure.
That said, as things shake out and maybe people are developing some different strategies and they realize, the randomness of this is maybe not doing it for them tactically, because you have 3 different randomized roles. You have, what is my second Speedball going to be, and do either of them land where I want them to land?
Sure.
There is some randomness factor there that a lot of people that are tend towards being very competitive may look at that mathematics side and be like, okay, this doesn't give me as assured of a success as I would like.
Sure.
Or these might be the people that are going to put it on the board edge and then roll for it, and then whether it passes or fails, it's there on the board edge, and then they just grab it and go. There's always that person.
Yeah, if you're deploying for it, top of 1, you can just be ready. All right, well,
yeah,
this unit's on the flank, so
there's some ways to do it. But right now, barring some really kind of, I guess, out there strategies of like, I need to use my command tokens for X, Y, and Z in this order to accomplish, whatever. I think that most games you're going to see both players buying them.
Yeah, I think that is probably going to be very, very common. And the main reason I haven't seen it as much in my games is I have been playing more learning games and other just kind of quick pickup games. And like I did order a set of the Speedball tokens from Arsenal, but part of it has been I don't have something that easily just represents a 55mm token, and I don't want to have to get the chart and roll, and I just don't logistically feel like doing the steps to actually play with it. And my opponents have generally been like, yeah, I don't really feel like bothering with these either. So we've just kind of a sort of gentleman's agreement to not use them. But I have played with them a little bit. Most of the time, I forget to use them so far. I'll buy them. And
I have run into that a lot myself.
Yeah, I'm like, oh, well, I'm going to wait until the right moment to use them. And that's...
Yep. And that's where it's like, okay, yeah, just use them right off the bat, and then you don't forget.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, can you tell I'm the person who keeps all the scrolls and potions until the end of the game because I might need them, and then don't use them anyway on the final boss fight because I forget?
Yep. Yeah, we know.
Stupid nether brain. So, yeah. But, it's one of those things where it is a really high impact rule. It does have a fair amount of complexity to the overall use. It's not too complex to have in the game or anything like that, but it is kind of a lot to do, especially keeping in mind all the extra things associated with a given mission and things like that. But what are you kind of looking for when you're using these? Do you have... I mean, it sounds like we're pretty much in agreement in terms of the ones you pick. And that's usually the extra wound mitigation on attack piece of choice, or maybe switch on if the opponent has those sorts of threats. Does that sound like about where you're at? It's like the one you call, it's always one of those.
Yeah, basically. And especially if I'm going like right off the bat in the turn, it's going to be one of the wound mitigation ones every time. If I've waited a little bit or forgotten about it, that increases the likelihood of using switch on, because at that point somebody's done something to something of mine that I'm looking at going, it'd be really useful right now, not having that.
Yeah.
And that's when I remember, oh yeah, I can maybe do switch on here and have something run up and say, no, that's gone away. But yeah, if I'm using it proactively, it's going to be auto repair suite or a Vitapack every single time.
Yeah. And I've seen even reactively, a number of players will use that kind of the same way. Like, oh, your opponent has come in and maybe knocked out one of your high performing pieces. And then you use this to go, all right, well, you didn't kill him. Yes, it's true. You saw that I didn't have any medical staff or engineers or what have you, but boom, here's a speedball. And I'm going to go fix my guy because you forgot to double tap.
Yep.
Or didn't have the orders or whatever the case may be. Couldn't see him.
Definitely done that a couple times so far. I do think that if you're looking across the table and it's very obvious that your opponent is got a hacking heavy list with good repeater coverage, that maybe that's where it'll swing harder for me to use the switch on as my chosen one, depending on the situation, the matchup, as it were.
Right. Yeah, I feel like the jetpack is one of those things where it might be useful as like a last turn objective grab upgrade. It's like, all right, I don't really have very many orders left, but I'm going to go in and I'm going to interact with an objective, and I just need to make sure I get there fast. Like, all right, well, instead of moving 4-4, I'll be 6-6 and have some options for verticality with a jetpack. And like that idea is cool to me. I've not seen that happen yet. And I think that's going to be a minority of experiences, but I like the idea. Overkill, I actually feel like the reload ability of Overkill is actually pretty cool. Something that comes to mind for me is like a Hollow Man multi-rifle pitcher. Like, oh, I dropped both my pitchers, but now I can get another set without needing to go back to my backfield with my baggage bot or what have you and start, expanding the net a little bit further. Or say a heckler who's used their panda and maybe their jammer, and now they get all of that back. Those things are kind of interesting to me. I think that's fun. Opponents maybe don't think that's fun, I guess, but you mean not more repeaters?
Yeah. Honestly, it's like mini use one turn baggage on one model, and I'm a little sore about baggage auto reloading stuff in the states phase as is. So yay, because that's definitely been annoying when facing hordes of models with nothing but Panzerfaust and Flammenspeers, and like they finally are gone, and then it hits the states phase. Like, oh, they reloaded. By the way, now it's your turn.
Oh, you mean all of
and
them?
Now I have
6 to 10 point models with missile launchers and heavy rocket launchers.
Yeah, and I'm like, cool. And now I get to wade through all of this stupid AROs of all these things that you use active turn. Awesome, thank you.
Yeah. I like that it makes disposable equipment more appealing. Is it a little much? Maybe. I don't know yet. I haven't seen it be terribly abused. Like, I haven't even seen as much as you're describing. I've seen it come up semi-frequently where people will actually bring baggage bots for baggage instead of just necessarily.
Yeah, you should play spicy.
Yeah, I could see that.
Like nothing but long yaws.
Yep.
Like really, dude. Really?
Yeah, I know another one of our locals is pretty turret happy. Jesse has been going through and running a lot of turrets lately, it sounds like. I haven't played him yet with it. I actually haven't played any turret heavy list with or against.
I've played against some turret layers, but not like super heavy. But this is also where I learned that, apparently Aleph needs a model that drops Mark 12 turrets.
Of course. What else is Sophie supposed to do?
Yeah.
It's why you take her over Parvati.
Like you're looking at my at best combi rifles, and then I'm like, Mark 12s, really? That was necessary. Okay. I finally chew through that, and then hey, have another one.
Yeah, Shakti, the character Yadu, she drops a emitter turret, which is pretty sweet.
That is actually really cool. I love the emitter in this edition.
Me too.
It is so good.
It's a really cool upgrade.
Well, and there's one of the Gizamarai that has an emitter.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's fantastic.
Yeah, makes it a threat.
Like and it's just cheap, and throw them in a team with everything else and give it all the bonuses, and then I just happen to have this like really solid ARO piece that's also EM. Like, I don't know, it's just, I think it's a really cool profile.
For sure. Yeah, I think that is neat. It's definitely been a good upgrade for the edition. I like that some of this EM and other non-lethal weaponry is getting more appealing, and that it's not just, okay, well, take your big gun and mow down whatever it is. Like, you have more options to deal with things, especially things that don't cost SWC, which is nice. Like the emitters and thunderbolts don't cost SWC on either of those.
Well, and I love it that I basically upgraded my EM combi to an EM Feuerbach.
Right, yeah. And it was only burst 1, and now it's burst 2, which is not like amazing, but it's way better. And some models, they get bonuses.
And that range band is so good.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think you just never really saw the emitter used when it was burst 1 combi range.
Almost never. It was very rare.
I think I saw it used maybe twice in the last like 10 years.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It was just, 1, it was a fairly rare weapon, and 2, it was almost never better than, even if that model had a combi rifle, like, unless you were specifically shooting like a tag or something.
In the back.
And you were outside of their zone of control. And in the back. And they couldn't do anything. Like, okay, then it's probably worth using the emitter. But otherwise, you would just take whatever rifle equivalent you have and knock something over with that instead.
Yep.
So with Speedball, we've kind of talked about some of the offensive uses, just a little bit, in terms of how you can use it to keep pushing past an opponent's defense. And I think that that's kind of like the main use that you will find in Speedball. One of the things that I kind of worry in terms of it being an offensive tool primarily is that I feel like there is relatively little that you can do to interact with this. If you are playing someone and they go first and they get the extra wound mitigation of whatever variety, at that point it's too late. You either need an arrow that's powerful enough to just take them off the table in one go, or maybe multiple arrows because they misjudge or are just feeling cocky and run into multiple things and you pick them up before the Vitapack or auto repairs triggers. Maybe there's that, but I feel like those are going to be rare circumstances in either case. Even missile launchers are not going to pick up a lot of things that are primary attack pieces at this point.
Yeah.
That said, what can you do to kind of mitigate these? I think part of it is because the Vitapack or auto repairs are the more appealing options, generally speaking. EM arrows are great for that sort of thing. Now, obviously, there's switch on, then that's no longer the case. But at least that means that you are forcing them to use that power up instead of them mitigating the damage that you've dealt entirely. So you can use emitters like we were talking about in ARO, or similar things like riot stoppers or adhesive rifles to stop these units that have these potential extra wounds on them, or extra wounds they can take. Still getting used to the new nomenclature.
Yeah. Adhesive launcher rifle.
Yes, because extra burst.
Oh, it is true. They did go up in burst, didn't they?
Yeah, they're burst 2 now.
Okay.
So that's why they're rifles instead of just launchers.
But shouldn't that make them adhesive launcher carbines?
One would think.
Just saying, CB. A little consistency would be appreciated.
Right? Yeah, I mean, honestly, they could have just still been called adhesive launchers.
Yeah.
And just been burst 2, and it would have been just as easy. Yeah, so with that, you can kind of get around the extra wounds portion by doing things that shut down the enemy instead of just trying to damage them. It's not something you can really prepare for, And if you have too much of it, then your opponent's going to choose to drop a switch on instead. And while you'll still, if you hit them, that means you still won the face-to-face, but they kind of get a free pass and just they get the opportunity to save. And then if they fail, they auto-clear the states as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that doesn't feel awesome. But yeah, what about you, Ian? What ways do you think that there are to mitigate some of the common uses of speedballs?
Well, I think some of it is really good ARO placements where makes it harder for your opponent to leverage that, especially if they're able to take, if you're able to get multiple AROs on a model that's running one of these. I think that's pretty good. There's other things you can do sometimes around like hidden deployment or airborne deployment, things like that, where it gives you an option to come in after they've done whatever, maybe get behind them kind of thing to neutralize some stuff. Not always the best plan, especially if they've already killed some of your stuff and depleted some of your orders, but there is some option there. It's always good old-fashioned luck and hope they fail that combat jump.
Sure, there is that.
Especially since you can't influence it.
Right.
Periods, but yeah. Yeah, I guess mitigating your opponent on it. Anything you would be doing to mitigate your opponent normally is going to help. You just need to do it a little more because it's going to take you an extra round of AROs on average to deal with the problem, because they either ignore your first round of hacking adhesive EM, or they just have that extra wound to kind of spend, or they get their extra to their saves, whatever it might be. Whatever you can do to force them to use the item as early as possible, to force that extra expenditure of orders. So it's just what you would normally do, just more of it.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of dealing with symbiomates.
Yeah.
And trying to place things that are just more likely to get shots off. Because, for someone that is running Toha and they have a symbiomate on their attack piece, it always feels bad to shrug it off and lose the symbiomate due to a stray combi shot or a Warcourse flash pulse or something like that, when they could have used it to save against something a lot scarier potentially. Yeah. So yeah, having more and more varied AROs will go a long way as far as that goes to try and hem those sorts of things in. And so there is relatively limited use in terms of things you can do to stop a speedball. It's more about how do you mitigate the effectiveness once it's there. And I 100% agree with Ian that the having additional AROs and having more of a crumple zone to try and, get a stray wound on something and just kind of eat up those orders will go a long way.
I think the new Thunderbolt TR bots are really useful in this role.
Sure, yeah.
Cheap, don't cost SWC, just kind of a good overall thing to put up to try to deny your opponent pretty much, whatever. Just take some shots.
Yeah, exactly. Just force something through, get those to proc, or if you're really lucky, since they have that extra burst, there are some things like you could just send a heavy infantry to dead if things went extraordinarily well. Obviously, you can't count on that, but sometimes that'll happen, and then you can just kind of ignore the benefit that they would get from the speedball that way. And even more so if it happens to be a 1 vitality unit or a structure unit. It is interesting. I would love to see some changes with speedball, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. It's a little different being a core rule, because those tend to change less, other than just clarifications. Like mechanical changes happen less frequently. They do happen, but not as much. So we'll see how that goes. We're still looking forward to the first big FAQ of N5, and I'm really interested to see what that looks like. And because there's a lot of uncertainties with the addition and things that, we've seen a lot of satellites in the US that have been putting together FAQs and kind of bouncing off each other a little bit to try and present some of these issues to Corvus Belli just to get more clarification. as well as kind of give players a little bit of a framework in the interim until that happens, because there are going to be events that are happening before that, like SLS, which is next weekend as of recording. But yeah, so I think as far as speedballs go, it's a really interesting rule, and I think there's a lot of potential there. I'm curious to see how that goes. But before we wrap up with our final thoughts, I do want to give a big thank you to our patrons. You all help us with recurring costs and things like that, and make it so it's easier to run the show and keep us going. If equipment needs to be replaced, or software subscriptions, or other things like that that otherwise just come entirely out of pocket for us, none of it goes to pay us. Everything that you contribute goes back into the show in one form or another, whether that be special projects or some of the expenses I mentioned. And if you are interested and willing to support us in that way, you can find us at patreon.com/metachemistry. And you can also join as a free member. So if you just want to see our posts and kind of stay on top of updates, that's one way to do it, is you can join that. If you do join at any paid level, then we try and give you some extra benefits to show you our gratitude for that, like early access to content, the discount to Mo Games if you're in North America, and some things like that, as well as the Discord access where you get some special channels that are just for patron members. And as far as our Discord itself goes, that is, other than those channels, free and available for anyone. You can join us using the link in the description. And we'd love to have you for more Infinity Talk. If you want to kind of chat with us directly, tell us what you think about the show, suggest topics, talk with other people about lists, or talk with us about lists, or otherwise just kind of get more Infinity discourse in your life, that's a good way to do it. And we'd love to have you. There's always fun stuff going on. So with that said, Ian, final thoughts on Speedballs. How are you feeling about them?
I think they're interesting. I'm not sure how I feel about them as far as being part of like the competitive aspect of Infinity. I like the idea. I like how the intent it was presented with.
Mm-hmm.
I am not really certain that the execution matches that intent. I am not 100% certain how to alter it to make it that, or if that's even something that they're interested in doing or intend at all. But I do think it is an interesting idea.
For sure.
I will say I think of the interesting ideas that CB has been putting into the game, I feel like this is better than Reinforcements.
Sure. I could see that.
Because they both operate kind of the same way, where they benefit the player that's being more aggressive and alpha strikey generally, but this seems less over the top of the two.
Yeah, and it feels like they're both mechanics that are meant to the opposite.
Yes.
And there's that kind of dissonance there that is a little awkward in my mind.
But we also, you get any rule mechanic in front of gamers, and we will break the system and use it how it's not intended, because the rules will somehow allow whatever nonsense that we're going to pull with it. It is just a fact. So generally, most things seem to not fall into that category with Infinity because it's a pretty tight rule set. But every now and then, something pops up and we're just like, yes, let's see how far we can take this nonsense.
Sure. Yeah, given the opportunity, players will optimize fun out of any given game.
Yes, they will.
Yeah, I think that Speedball is a really interesting mechanic, and I like the thought behind it. And I do like that Corvus Belli is interested in new and interesting additions to the game in this manner. I think if I were looking at it, one thing that would be helpful is, other than, say, the, can only be used turn 2 onwards, I think that if the first 3 results, the Vita Pack, auto repairs, and the switch on, if they could only be used in the alternate mode, as in they only work if someone carries it and spends a short skill to apply it to someone, I think that would make a big difference as well, because it's not just an automatic cool, it's over now. I did it, we're fine. There's no roll, there's no skill declaration needed or anything like that. It just happens. I think removing that portion of it would inherently make it more reactive. And while you could get some of the same instances, it's not always going to happen that way because you at least need to spend an order. So, for instance, you could have your powerful attack piece be some sort of heavy infantry in a fire team and drop a Vita Pack, and one of the other members grabs the Vita Pack, and then they can apply it to said heavy infantry when they take a wound or when they go down or what have you. But at least you would have to spend that order and then get them back up.
Yeah, the automatic usage thing is kind of where it gets maybe a little over the top because you don't have to really expend any resources to get the effect.
Yeah, other than the command token, which maybe you'd use and maybe you wouldn't anyway.
Yep.
I do think that it's kind of interesting that there's a little bit of risk by making the selection up front. But if you're planning on dropping it your first turn kind of no matter what, then that's not really there as much.
Yep.
But yeah, and I think the other three results are perfectly fine. Like, they feel reasonable and have some noticeable effect without being seemingly problematic. But if those three just limited to that instead, and still, it would be powerful, right? Like, that's basically having, a doctor or an engineer who makes the roll, and it can be anyone on the table who gets that ability, and then they auto pass. Like, that's still good.
Mm-hmm.
That's better than a command token reroll on a check, right? I think that would go a long way. And I kind of hope that something like that happens to make it so that it's less likely to just have a unit that runs off on its own, goes and does something, takes some damage, shrugs it off, or runs through some repeaters or EM or whatever it is, and that bounces. And kind of make it so you have to do something to make it work. Yeah, like a tag, for instance. I feel like a lot of tags are going to be running around on their own. And so if you want to go fix them in whatever fashion that takes, you'd have to have another unit that's going to run up after them with that Speedball upgrade.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe even if that model carried the upgrade, say the attacking tag in this instance, but if they took a wound, they would have to spend a short skill to use it. And if they were unconscious, then an ally could get into base contact with them, spend a short skill, and apply it for them. So that way the healing unit doesn't necessarily have to pick it up. So something like that. I think those are some kind of interesting things that could be neat ways to integrate this. And we'll see. I'm not terribly optimistic about notable changes to how core rules work, but it does happen every so often. So who knows? I know it's kind of a concern that's come up in the community, and that's part of the impetus for us talking about it and kind of giving our thoughts. And we'd love to hear what you think about that as well. Mm-hmm. So if you have thoughts on Speedball, yeah, feel free to let us know. So you can either throw us a comment on our Spotify page, or you can run by us on the Discord or on our Facebook or what have you. And we'd love to hear from you. On behalf of Metachemistry, this has been Devin
and Ian, and that's the meta.